Well, good afternoon, everybody, and we got a great programme for you this afternoon. And it's lovely to come into your homes again as we share together a cup of tea and some news, reflections, local stories of interest, music, and of course bringing all that together in a little Christian reflection at the end. But first of all, as always each week, we begin with some national church news. The former Archbishop of York will receive a peerage, a government spokesman has told reporters. Dr. Sentamu will be made a life peer in the House of Lords. There has been a lot of disquiet that the first ever Archbishop in the Church of England was not granted a life peerage in the Queen's Honours List. Another 36 new peers were announced this summer, including the Prime Minister's brother Joe Johnson and the former cricketer Ian Botham. Although being an archbishop does not confer an automatic right to a peerage on retirement, Archbishops David Hope, George Carey and Rowan Williams were all made life peers. Dr. Sentamu is expected to be named in the New Year's Honours List. Well, more than half of Britons describe themselves as having no religion, new figures reveal. The proportion of non-believers is at a record high of 53%, according to the latest data from the National Centre for Social Research, British Social Attitudes Survey. The 2016 research found 15% of people belong to the Church of England, 9% to the Catholic Church, 17% to other Christian denominations, and 6% to other religions. The proportion of those who describe themselves as having no religion has increased gradually since the survey began in 1983, when it stood at 31%. Researchers have said that the fall in religious affiliation has at least in part been driven by young people, with 71% of those aged 18 to 24 saying they had no religion in 2016, up from 62% in 2015. The data shows a decline in religious affiliation among all age groups over the same period, but among the oldest people, those with no religion are still in the minority. The Bishop of Durham urges the government to prioritise children, to end hunger and poverty after school meals outcry. And we've all been watching this on the news in the last few days. The Bishop of Durham said that while the government should have voted to extend free school meal vouchers for this half-term and for future holidays, this would have been only a sticking plaster solution to a longer-term and deeper problem of child poverty. The Right Reverend Paul Butler has said while the government should have granted free school meals, it is really just a sticking plaster. I remember it was not that long ago when we were having the same debate about food banks, and extensive research was done by the MP Frank Field and the former Bishop of Truro, Tim Thornton. Personally, I believe there was a lot of truth in that research. The same conclusions that the Bishop of Durham has reported. It is just a sticking plaster. We have failed to get to the real roots of poverty. Well, now some church news in our local church at Holy Trinity. Well, two different people have sent me emails this week with attachments from church and newspaper cuttings about letters that the public have been writing in regarding what is described as church bureaucracy. All criticising the Church of England over huge parish shares or common funds or quotas. They've all had those kind of names over the years. All those still having to be paid by parishes who just cannot afford it. And even with COVID, there is no reduction, and many parishes are now quite desperate. They criticise the fact that while the church continues to take away parish clergy, they are still expected to pay huge common funds, while more bishops and archdeacons and all manner of new posts are being created with huge salaries. Many parishes have had enough. All dioceses are criticised, and one article I read was concerning the Diocese of Oxford, where in this letter the writer complains bitterly that although the stipendiary workforce has been cut significantly, directors of apostolic life and archdeacons and assistant archdeacons, heads of justice and peace and integrity have all been created with huge salaries of over £40,000 a year. And the same writer says that the senior clergy of bishops and archdeacons remains the same as 100 years ago. However, the stipendiary clergy in the Oxford diocese that were 800 100 years ago now are down to 370. Well, my own thoughts, and these are mine alone, are that in many years of ministry, now numbering nearly 35, I have seen archdeacons who were also in charge of parishes, bishops who acted also as archdeacons, and we used to see our bishop on a regular, frequent basis. It does all seem all very top-heavy now, and in a way I agree so much with those who have written in this week. Examples, indeed, should be set from the top. The foundation of the parish system with clergy in every parish has been the backbone and success of the church over many years. Is the overindulgence of the church bureaucracy going to finish the church forever? I'd be interested to hear your views. Please do email me, ring me, or write to me at the vicarage. Well, more local now. Our new November 1-to-1 newsletter is out this weekend, and in it we have snippets of news. If you are on the church electoral roll, you will have been emailed or posted a newsletter, or you can collect one from the church. Some dates for your diary now. This Sunday is All Saints' Day, and we will be celebrating All Saints, as usual, with our 8 o'clock said Eucharist and a solemn Eucharist at Holy Trinity at 10 a.m. The solemn Eucharist will also appear on as a programme on our website, YouTube and Facebook. On Monday the 2nd of November, which normally follows immediately after All Saints' Day, is All Souls' Day, and we shall be having a sung Requiem Eucharist at 10:30 a.m. at Holy Trinity Church. The music is set to be very moving and fitting as we remember at the altar all your loved ones by name who have passed into God's nearer presence. So may I just say something now about Remembrance Sunday? Please put this date in your diary, Sunday the 8th of November. The usual 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. Eucharists will take place at Holy Trinity Church, all with acts of remembrance. In the evening, we will be having the Weymouth branch of the Royal British Legion Civic Service at 6:30 p.m. in the presence of the Mayor of Weymouth, Councillor Graham Winter. It will be different this year because of COVID restrictions, but we have a very full service planned and some extra special music. And finally, for our news this morning, Keith Whittock from Holy Trinity Church is selling Christmas cards that he has designed of Holy Trinity Church. A portion of the proceeds of the sale of those cards will be given to our church. And similarly, Keith has cards on sale at this time to raise money for the Sudan appeal. He is set up in church already, so please come and support him, or if you would like his contact details, please contact me via the parish office and I will pass those on to you. Well, our Sunday school children have have not only been ringing bells, but have also been very busy again. Last weekend they were busy making pumpkins and carving them out as rather freaky looking heads. Anyway, have a look at what they have made. Great. Well done, kids. Well, we're heading now to Bincleaves Road, to Bincleaves Green. That's here in Weymouth. A very special monument has been erected there in memory of a local MP who was a Christian social reformer, worked for prison reform, but particularly for the abolition of the slave trade. I quote this from his biography. One of the ill effects of cruelty is that it makes the bystanders cruel. I hope you enjoy this video. Well, we're here on Bincleaves Green this morning in Holy Trinity Parish to remember a man who was instrumental in campaigning to abolish slavery, educate the poor, and push forward prison reform. I want to introduce to you Father Edward this morning, Father Edward Tilsley, who is a friend and a fellow priest, and also a very committed member of the Thomas Fowle Buxton Society. Ed, this is a lovely memorial. Tell us a little bit about it and about the history of Thomas Fowle Buxton.
Well, I'll do what I can. It's one of several memorials in the country. There's one in Norwich Cathedral, which is very much the cradle of his ancestral background. Because of his great political stature, there's one in Westminster Abbey, one of the busts, quite near to the central crossing in the nave and transept. And there is also a memorial to Thomas Fowler Buxton not far from there in the Victoria Gardens at Westminster in London. And this one is the newest, and it is here because of the fact that, as Andrew, as you've just said, Thomas Fowler Buxton was MP for Weymouth briefly, and his dates are on here, and I'm trying to find them. 1818 to 1837.
Yes.
So not hundreds of years, but a good stint as the MP for this, as it was then, constituency. And it was his work while he was this MP that earned him the baronet title in 1840. He was a quite extraordinary man from what I've read about him, and I'm so glad that this place where he lived, in Belfield House, in those days MPs lived in the places where they served very often, and he, as well as being a well-respected and very generous MP, he was also very active on the national political stage. And Andrew, you've alluded to some of his work on the national stage, which he wasn't afraid of, but which he clearly had to roll his sleeves up, if you understand that expression, quite high to get involved with. He was no stranger to controversy and contention, and he, as I understand what I've read and what I've heard about him, was somebody who was very much a conviction politician, a social activist, somebody who cared very deeply about the difficult issues of his day and had passions which he wanted to bring into his political life, in making the world and society, in his understanding of it, a much better place than he believed it was. So the story of Thomas Fowler Buxton is a funny one, because he wasn't a sort of glamorous, high-profile figure which caught the public imagination in the way somebody might today. He was a family man. He underwent extraordinary losses of children to death.
Did I read somewhere they had whooping cough or something? Or...
I believe that's right.
Yes.
And he had an enormous share of the sorrows and burdens of life of that day. Yes, he was from a privileged family, a Quaker rooted family, a well-to-do family, but he wasn't somebody who gave the impression of great sense of self-entitlement or anything like that. He believed that he was privileged. He was thankful for that, and he believed, it seems to me, that he wanted to use that very creatively and very directly for those who could never claim that gift of privilege. So, as you mentioned, Andrew, he was somebody who was committed to primarily, and this is what he's primarily known for and celebrated for by the Thomas Fowler Buxton Society, for his hand in the abolition of the slave trade. So he stood at the complete sort of opposite ends of people who have other memorials erected to them, who did things in their neighbourhoods as slave traders. This person could see that fundamentally there was something profoundly wrong and degrading about this process of enslavement on all sorts of levels, and he followed from Wilberforce, who was instrumental in bringing about the Act of Abolition, which was a legal status. But then the work had to be done of actually abolishing the trade, and that's where Buxton came in. So he came in in the wake of Wilberforce and did a recognisably awesome amount of work and got himself into all sorts of unpopular places and got caught up in many struggles which were very costly to him in actually seeing that dignity was restored to the then understanding of slavery, which involved, of course, Jamaican people, people from whose origins were from the African continent, who'd been co-opted for agricultural purposes in the Caribbean and other places. And he was very committed to that, and is held in very high regard in Kingston, Jamaica. More so even than here, unless incidentally I forgot to mention the monuments elsewhere in the world to him, so there's one there as well. So that's a potted history of why we are, those of us here in Weymouth that recognise this now and connect to this part of our history, are so glad this monument's here and why we celebrate it.
Tell us a little bit about the monument. I'm going to, if you'd like to walk around and I'll follow you. Why did they put it here, and what's it made of, and perhaps some of the things that are on the monument you could tell us a little bit about. I mean, I think this is Belfield House where he lived, isn't it?
This is Belfield House. Belfield House, of course, still stands. Very easily recognisable by its four pillars there. The house is in Belfield Park Avenue now, and it's resided in. It was once the only house in that part of Weymouth and Melcombe Regis, or the only house of any size. The next houses would have been many hundreds of metres away, and what is now the Buxton Road and the roads down from there towards the harbour would have been the private landscape parkland belonging to this Belfield house. That house, I believe, I don't think he owned it. I think he rented it from a family member in order for him to carry out his duties as the MP for the town. And yes, it's a very beautiful house which has recently been restored. It underwent in the early part of this century and the 20th century quite a lot of neglect, but it's now been restored and is lived in. So that's Belfield House.
Okay.
This is his motto. You may not be able to pick it up in the light, but whatever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might, is the quote from Ecclesiastes. And I suppose anybody with a sense of conviction about what they're doing can't be compromised and can't be half-hearted about it, because then it's not really conviction, is it?
No.
And people that choose that path in their lives are people who still pay a great price, as we know. And it's very inspiring and humbling to be aware of really all the grace and generosity that surrounds us, even in these very sad and strange new times, is on the back of, on the shoulders of, I'm going to use that word, on the shoulders of people like this, whose convictions mattered so much to them that they just had to act, whatever the consequences. And I really respect that, actually. I think that's wonderful. And you see it, you don't have to be a great man of wealth to exercise these things. And he recognised this himself and was very committed to the reform of people in prison and people in minority groups, what we would call minority ethnic groups and marginalised groups in society, people that have had a tough time just being who they are and who they're meant to be. and he sort of got inside what their lives were like, and this is where his passion, I think, was so vibrant and so long lasting. So as well as celebrating a person that did a job, we're celebrating a person who brought a great depth and wisdom to our history as a nation, who lived here as well.
Edward, tell us a little bit about the memorial and what it's made of and how it came to be here. And
Well, it's made of Portland stone, the raw rock hewn from the quarries, and provided courtesy by Albion Stone as an enormous contribution to it. There was a competition for its design, the details of which escape me, but they're worth finding out, and the work of the shaping was, I believe, carried out through Weymouth College. All the funding concerned with planning and assembly and maintenance, which was quite considerable, was all done by people who felt that they could contribute locally to it, which was really rather lovely.
absolutely.
And some say, oh, what a waste of money and all that stuff, but I don't agree. I think we need to sort of, as it were, have a focus for our inspirations.
Yeah.
And it's well loved, and it's a great honour to be part of a society that gathers around it and also, remembers great men.
Thank you, Edward. And it's in a most wonderful spot. Just let me show you. See that view here overlooking the bay. A wonderful tribute to a very special person in Weymouth.
Thank you, Father Edward. It's always lovely to see you. And a good story about a good Christian man who lived out his Christian life in his concern for the poor, needy and abused. Well, now we're going to go over to James and Lizzie, who are performing for us this morning Sally Gardens by Benjamin Britten.
She passed the
Thank you, James and Lizzie. We shall be hearing from you a little bit later on in our programme again. Well, today we're visiting Devon again, strangely enough. Today, a lovely market town which has a rich history and a lovely church. Watch this. Here we are in Holsworthy in Devon, about 36 miles from Exeter. Holsworthy means estate or manor. It's a lovely, delightful little market town, quite a busy town. I'm here today on a Sunday, so perhaps not quite so busy as it normally is. This is the White Hart Hotel with the flags flying from it. As we move up the road, we see the keep your distance signs. We move up this idyllic little town to the town centre. Every little market town has a town centre where still they have a pannier market weekly, and where, as you look around, it still has all its own little shops with its war memorial in the middle. It's well known for its St. Peter's Fair, held every year for 4 days. It was granted a charter in 1614 by King James, and incorporated into it is what is the Pretty Maid presentation, which takes place in the parish church every year. Here's a picture of the Pretty Maid having just been crowned in the parish church. And the charter decreed that the town crier would announce the fair every year. And so it happens, and is quite an occasion for everyone, along with a very, very popular livestock market, which is very well known, but sadly came to an end in 2014 when the market moved out of town. So here we are now at the parish church, an early English style church dating from the 13th century. It's had renovations done to it during the 19th century, including a complete rebuild of the chancel, the north aisle and the nave and south aisle. The tower that you see now is in 3 stages. Here is a lovely porch, and around the porch you will see those glorious, beautiful decorations. And fascinating for me, here on your left now, you see this incredible carved stone holy water stoop, remnants of a Norman building. As we come into church, we see it's open, but we are to abide by the rules of sanitizing our hands and rules about covering our faces. There's the nice font where it should be, just inside the main door of the church. And the first thing you see apart from the font is this delightful little cricket stand, which we're about to see now. The stand is in front of the statue, or a carving rather, of the Virgin Mary. It's a delightful carving. Couldn't find any evidence anywhere of who carved it, but it really is absolutely beautiful. A young virgin carrying her child with a dove on her shoulder. This church is one of the few in the country to depict the devil in stained glass. It also gained fame from Samuel Sebastian Wesley's music, Holsworthy Church Bells, composed for the chiming drum. A legend states that the tower was built on top of a live human sacrifice to ensure a strong foundation. Well, here, abiding by COVID rules, worship takes place in this aisle with a makeshift altar with a lovely frontal on it, in front of the organ. The organ is said to be by Renatus Harris and to have come from Chelsea Old Church. It was removed to Bideford in 1723 and brought to Holsworthy in 1865. And over the next 2 years it was restored and enlarged. The pipes have been recently painted, I would have assumed as I looked at the organ. A church, like most churches, village churches, lots of memorials, and this wonderful stained glass window. It's a very dark church, this church, but somehow it seems to add to the whole atmosphere of the building. As you can see, these crosses on the walls, these are what are called stations of the cross, which are traditionally stations which we use during Holy Week to depict the last few days of Jesus' life. In front of us now we see the pulpit. Sadly, I couldn't get any further because it was roped off. So beyond the eagle and into the choir it looks exceedingly dark, and it's a shame because the reredos behind the high altar is made of oak, and it was donated in 1926 and made in 15th century style in memory of Mary Aspinall. The reredos depicts St. Peter and figures the 8 symbols of the Passion story, beautifully painted and gilded, I must say. Like several churches, one side tends to be clear windows quite often, and the other side stained glass windows. We look to the back to the tower, and the tower of the church contains bells and also a carillon, which I'm told is rung quite regularly. A good peal of bells here. Here are some chairs. Obviously worship had just taken place when I had come in. Hope you enjoyed that. I love those wonderful old traditions that are still kept in towns and villages. They are so much part of our history. Long may they continue. Well, let's have our hymn today now. A good, nice, raising hymn of praise.
Good morning, everybody, and this morning's hymn is Alleluia, Sing to Jesus, and it's number 262 in the hymn book, and it's to a tune called Hyfrydol, which means lovely in Welsh.
Lovely. One you all know. Well, we're heading back to Devon again now for another reflection from myself.
Good morning, and the sun is just coming up here, and it's going to be another lovely day here in Devon. This morning I'm walking across the fields, which I'm going to do. And this particular field has just been cut, and there are bales up here ready to be taken in for the winter, for feeding the cattle. The birds, I must say, are exceedingly vocal this morning. Well, today I'm thinking about another passage from the Gospels, from St. Luke's Gospel in particular, chapter 4, verse 21. Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. Well, I don't know whether you've ever had a review in your workplace or on how well you've been doing. I know that I have to have one every year. I'm not very happy about that because it just seems to imply that my role as a priest is just like any other job, which I don't believe it is. But I can see the positive aspects of having a yearly review. You may have one yourselves. And often we're assured that in our review that we're doing our job quite well. But we may also be encouraged to improve in certain areas. Most of us, and I think I speak for myself as well, are relieved when the evaluation is done and we can go back to doing what we do and trying to improve in those certain areas that maybe we're lacking in our performance. Well, Jesus had travelled back to Galilee, and as word spread about the things he had been doing, people wanted to see if the stories they had heard were actually true. The people in his hometown knew him as Joseph's son, the carpenter's son, so they were really very curious about how this man could be all he claimed to be. And of course I have to say they were probably very doubtful as well. Jesus goes into the synagogue, you'll know this story, pulls out his job description from the book of the prophet Isaiah and begins to read. And he outlines why he is going from place to place and sharing the good news. God's story of grace, forgiveness, healing and love. The description in Isaiah shows why he heals lepers, declares the good news of God's love, and invites others to follow him. It explains why people who were blind can now see, and why others can walk even though they were paralyzed. Jesus is accomplishing his mission. Well, when Jesus invites us, you and me, to join him on the road, he calls us to do as he is doing. Are you serving him with the gifts he has given you? Are you ready for your job evaluation? Well, I'll leave that thought with you today. And now I'm going to carry on walking this lovely part of the country. I'll speak to you again soon. God bless.
Well, we've come to the end of another Thursday get-together. I'm always sad when we come to the end of our programmes, but we look forward to meeting again next week for another cup of tea together. Join me again for another programme next Thursday for all our news, information, and until then, God bless you.